Welcome to Cheating Tales Diary. Before we dive into today's story, we have a humble request. Please consider subscribing to this new channel. Help us hit our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Your support will motivate us to keep bringing you more exclusive original cheating wife stories. And now let's get started with today's story. Alfred Frell woke up every morning at exactly 6:35. A man of habit, living a simple, quiet life. In the small neighborhood of Cedar Falls, Iowa, where rooftops stayed blanketed in snow through long winters, Alfred's mornings always started the same. A cup of milky tea and a crackly old radio show humming in the background. He delivered letters and small packages for the USPS, and folks liked him. He was steady, dependable, a little shy. The most exciting part of his week? The Monday morning crossword. His days followed a strict rhythm. Leave the house, grab the postal van, deliver to 3 blocks in town, eat a Reuben sandwich at 1:10 p.m., and pick up flowers for Hope by 4:45. Hope? His wife. A school librarian. Her laugh used to fill their home. But lately, it hadn't. The first time something felt off was when Hope started mentioning a book club. Thursday nights only, she'd said. Just a few girls from work. At first, Alfred didn't question it. He wasn't the kind of man who asked too many questions. But the timing of that club started changing. It used to be 6 to 8 p.m. Then it stretched to 10. One night, Hope didn't come home until after midnight, smelling faintly of wine and a brand of perfume Alfred didn't recognize. She didn't want him to ask questions. And Alfred, well, he didn't want to. He wanted to be a good husband. Or at least he wanted to believe he was. But then came the little things. The ones that plant doubt. Hope started placing her phone face down. She'd head straight to the shower after coming home. And one evening, Alfred spotted a number in her call log. Unknown. It always popped up after Thursday nights. One afternoon, during his usual delivery route, Alfred passed by Sunset Motel on Jefferson Street. He saw her car, that same blue sedan he'd gifted her for her birthday. He peeked through the front window but saw nothing. When he asked the front desk manager, the man casually said, "Room 17? Reserved every Thursday night for a J. Miller." Alfred just nodded and walked away. That day, he dropped a package from his hand. The first time in years. That night, he sat upright in bed. Didn't write in his diary, didn't turn on the radio. When Hope walked in, he asked only one thing. How was book club? She smiled, a smile Alfred now knew was fake, and said, "Oh, it was amazing. We read Sylvia Plath this week." Alfred didn't know who Sylvia Plath was, but he knew Hope was lying. The following week, he bought a tracker. A small GPS chip he tucked under the license plate of her car. Now, every Thursday night, he could see exactly where she was, in real time. And that Thursday night, the tracker confirmed it. Sunset Motel, room 17. Alfred's heart pounded like he was the one committing the crime. But this wasn't his theft. It was his heart being stolen. The next day, he found a crumpled receipt tucked in Hope's lipstick-stained purse. Sunset Motel. Time stamped 9:43 p.m. signed, J. Miller. For the first time, Alfred asked himself, how much silence am I supposed to swallow? But he didn't react with rage. That wasn't his way. Alfred was a postman. He moved slowly, but always got to the right address. He was now turning the storm inside him into a weapon. The following week, he approached the motel manager again, this time pretending to be an insurance investigator needing to check surveillance footage for a possible incident. The manager didn't blink. In small towns, trust still goes a long way. He handed Alfred a week's worth of security footage on a USB drive. At home, Alfred watched it on his laptop. At 9:30 p.m., Hope's car pulled into the lot. At 9:35, a tall, bald man, maybe mid-40s, entered the building. The resolution wasn't good enough to zoom in clearly, but Hope's face was unmistakable, laughing, holding his hand. Alfred paused the video, rewound, took a screenshot, saved it in a folder labeled Evidence 1. That night, when Hope got home, Alfred asked calmly, "Book club ran late again?" Hope lowered her eyes. "Yeah, a bit longer than usual. Karen's car broke down." Alfred nodded and whispered to himself, Karen's car was fine. He was no longer just a betrayed husband. He was a hunter, beginning to track his prey. Alfred Frell's world had shifted. His silence had become his strength. On the outside, he was still the polite postman. But inside, he was now fighting a quiet war. Against Hope. Against that stranger. Against the version of himself that still wanted to believe this wasn't real. Hope still left for work every morning, still smiled the same way, still came home at the usual time. But Alfred was watching now. Not just watching, surveilling. His military background had taught him more than just weapons and discipline. It had taught him about signals, encryption, surveillance, how to trace a digital footprint. And more importantly, it had taught him patience. Because to catch someone, you don't need to strike fast. You need to wait for the perfect moment. He installed a keylogger on Hope's laptop and phone, silently, without her knowledge. A tiny piece of software that recorded every keystroke, every email, every message. Within 2 weeks, Alfred had an entire digital diary, full of Hope's lies about the book club, her plans with a man named Justin, and a shared Google Drive link containing videos and notes from their visits to the Sunset Motel, like it was some sort of romantic getaway. One evening, when Hope claimed she was going to her cousin's wedding, alone, Alfred decided it was time. He headed straight to the Sunset Motel to meet the manager. He hid his USPS ID and introduced himself under a different name. Raymond Willis, a local blogger who writes about dirty little secrets in small towns. "I do community-based journalism," Alfred said. "Your motel's name came up in an adultery case. I just want to clear a few things up." The manager didn't hesitate. He let Alfred see the records, guest logbooks, CCTV timestamps, and visitor access sheets. Alfred took notes in his journal. Justin's name appeared almost every other Thursday, always paired with Hope. Justin Miller, insurance adjuster, twice divorced, and now having an affair with Hope. Alfred asked for a copy of the surveillance footage, called it a professional inquiry, and even offered a small donation. The footage was handed over. Now he had a complete timeline. When Hope arrived, when Justin followed, their cars, their entries and exits, their interactions, everything. The following week, Alfred visited a local electronics store and picked up a few micro-hidden cameras. He discreetly installed them in the bedroom dresser, the hallway lamp, and even inside the kitchen's smoke detector. Hope didn't suspect a thing. Why would she? Alfred still made breakfast like always, still watered the garden, still complimented her new dress like nothing had changed. But behind it all, he was recording everything. Every tone, every look, every slip of the tongue. Whenever Hope FaceTimed Justin, Alfred would screen record the entire call. "Do you think he knows?" Hope asked during one of their late-night calls. "Of course not, babe," Justin chuckled. "He's just a mailman." That laugh, that smugness, Alfred immediately saved the clip and named it. Never underestimate the mailman.mp4. That same week, Alfred set up his own surveillance outside the Sunset Motel, this time with a personal camera unit. He parked an old Chevy Impala across the street with an HD cam embedded in the rearview mirror. Every Thursday night, the live footage streamed quietly to Alfred's home system. By now, one wall of his garage looked like a tactical command center. A grid of screens showing Sunset Motel's entrance, 3 angles of his own house, and even Justin's workplace. all under surveillance. Then came the bathroom call. Hope whispered into the phone, "Don't worry. After next week, everything will be done. He'll be working late. Come at 7. That call triggered a new phase of preparation. Alfred contacted his old army buddy Marlon, now a digital security expert working in Silicon Valley. "I need burner IDs, location spoofers, and one deepfake license," Alfred said. "Are you in trouble?" Marlon asked. "Not yet," Alfred replied. "But someone else will be." Alfred was no longer just gathering evidence. He was executing a mission, not for revenge, for justice. Hope's behavior began to shift. Sometimes guilty glances, sometimes fake affection, and other times, cold detachment. One night, while Hope slept, Alfred gently used her finger to unlock her phone. Inside her Google Photos, he found an album. Hope and Justin together at the beach. Laughing, close, happy. One photo was captioned, "Our Little Secret." Alfred silently downloaded it, printed it, and slipped the photo into a plain white envelope. The next morning, he placed that envelope in the motel manager's mailbox with a single handwritten line. "You rent rooms to cheaters. What else do you hide?" Alfred was now playing a moral chess game. Every move calculated, deliberate, and executed in silence. He found Justin's wife's Facebook profile and sent her a friend request using an anagram alias. A week later, she accepted. That gave Alfred access to photos from inside Justin's home, family events, and most importantly, a picture of the pet dog Justin often called his little family. Alfred marked it on his board. Weakness point. Emotional leverage. Now, Hope's lies, Justin's truth, and Alfred's plan were no longer separate stories. They were pieces of one carefully constructed narrative. But the story wasn't over. Alfred was no longer just a husband. He was an invisible architect, laying out blueprints of betrayal in every corner of the life he once called normal. Snow was arriving late this year in Cedar Falls, but the temperature inside Alfred Frell was steadily rising. On the outside, everything still looked the same. Hope left every morning with her stack of library books, and Alfred returned home from the post office wearing the same calm smile, like nothing had changed. But now, every smile masked a plan. Every word rehearsed like a script. Every dinner felt like a final supper. Alfred had transformed into someone even he barely recognized. He was no longer the soft-spoken postman. He was a full-time strategist, reborn under a new name, Nick Buford. Nick Buford, a Midwestern trading consultant built from scraps of internet history. Alfred didn't just invent the name. He backed it up with a fake social security number, utility bills, and even a polished LinkedIn profile. He had become someone new. Under that alias, he rented a small, worn-down two-bedroom apartment just a few miles outside Cedar Falls. But the apartment wasn't just a hideout. It was his war room. Inside, the walls were covered with whiteboards and timelines. Markers traced Hope's daily movements, Justin's behavior patterns, Sunset Motel's visit logs, and frames from surveillance footage. Red strings and pinned notes stretched across the wall like something out of an FBI profiler's caseboard. Hope had no idea. She still approached Alfred with that strange mix of guilt and forced affection, sometimes touching his hand, sometimes asking softly, "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" Alfred would smile and reply, "Just heavy weather, I guess." But it wasn't the weather. It was the weight of truth. One day, Alfred reached out to a local college student, a girl studying graphic design. He had a special request. "Can you make a vintage-style romance poster? Something dreamy, something soft. I'll send the photos." He gave her a blurred image, a real photo of Hope and Justin walking out of Sunset Motel. The text? He wrote it himself. "Love is beautiful, unless it's borrowed." Coming soon, Motel Memories by NB. He had 4 large versions printed professionally. He already knew where and when he'd put them up. Then came a critical next step. Marissa. Marissa was one of Hope's acquaintances. They'd met once at a couple's dinner, and Alfred remembered just enough about her to feel familiar. Using his new identity, Nick Buford, he signed up for a membership at Marissa's gym, where she attended early morning yoga classes. After a week of light conversations, book suggestions, and well-placed humor, he invited her for coffee. He introduced himself as a short-term visitor in town, a consultant passing through on a client visit. During the conversation, he said casually, "I really miss how open people are here. It's not like the city." Marissa smiled. She saw warmth in Nick, maybe even charm. One day, as they talked over coffee, she leaned in slightly and asked, "Hey, doesn't Hope and Justin's house sit somewhere nearby?" Marissa laughed and said, "Yeah, kinda. You can actually see it from Lincoln Street. I used to have their spare key when they went out of town." Alfred just smiled. "That's sweet. You're like their emergency buddy." A week later, Alfred discreetly placed an envelope inside Marissa's gym locker. Inside was a thank you note, a $50 Starbucks gift card, and a blank keychain, a subtle test. That same night, Marissa handed him the key. "Hope won't mind," she said casually. "I mean, she trusts me." That key. Alfred placed it inside a small velvet pouch, like it was some sacred token. He now had access to Hope and Justin's home, and a new plan was forming. No force, no fingerprints, just a quiet entry, subtle changes, and a ghost-like exit. Through surveillance, he learned that next Thursday, Hope and Justin would be going to a marriage counseling session, their excuse to visit the motel. 2-hour window. At exactly 3:15 p.m. that day, Alfred Ach, as Nick Buford, unlocked the front door to their house. The place was familiar, but it looked different now. New furniture, new photo frames on the walls. Hope and Justin, on vacations, at the beach, sipping wine by a fireplace. Not a single trace of Alfred in any frame. He didn't smash anything, didn't steal. He simply did 3 things. Slipped a tracking chip into the bedroom drawer, installed a digital recorder in the living room, and sewed a tiny pin camera into the inner lining of Justin's jacket. Then he left a handwritten note inside the fridge. Just 3 words. "You look happy." Signed, A. Hope didn't know it yet, but she wasn't just living a lie anymore. Every second of her life was now being watched by a man who could break down every smile on her face like a forensic analyst. The next morning, Alfred sent an anonymous tip to a local radio station in Cedar Falls. "Watch out for the motel exhibition on Thursday morning. Art speaks the truth." He then posted one of his vintage posters outside the station, taped carefully to a utility pole in the parking lot. Hope and Justin's private moment was now just inches away from becoming a public punchline. And they had no idea who, when, or why the trap had been set. That evening, Alfred sat across from Hope at dinner, just like always. But now his eyes didn't reflect love. They measured. They calculated. Hope reached out gently. "You've changed, but you're also calmer. Are we okay?" Alfred smiled softly. "We're perfect. Just wait. You'll see." Alfred was no longer a lover, no longer a husband. He was the hunter now. And the forest was his own creation. His prey was already caught. Mornings in Cedar Falls were usually quiet. Local weather updates on the radio, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery, and that small town stillness that wrapped itself around every doorstep like a warm sip of tea. But this Thursday morning felt different. A crowd had started to gather outside the KFCR 93.7 radio station. No celebrity appearance, no protest. But still, the same question hung in the air. Did you see the poster? On the outer wall of the station building, a professionally mounted poster now faced the town. Cream and gold background. Hope and Justin smiling, holding glasses of wine. And beneath it, in bold red letters, "Love is beautiful. unless it's borrowed. Motel Memories, a true story by NB. Inside, producer Leah Wilkins opened her computer and noticed a new email in her inbox. Subject line: New art installation. Station exclusive. Attached was the same poster image, along with a link to a private blog titled The Mailman's Note. The blog began with this message: Some letters don't need postage. Some secrets don't need whispers. Sometimes the postman doesn't just deliver your mail, he delivers justice. Within 10 minutes, Leah read the blog post live during the Cedar Uncovered morning segment. The phone lines lit up. Call after call flooded in. Is that the same Hope Whitaker? The librarian? Is this Justin Miller, the insurance guy? Wait, was there never a book club? Hope got her first shock when she drove up to the station. A radio intern chuckled behind her and said, "Enjoy the art, ma'am." She didn't understand. Not at first. But then her eyes caught the poster taped on the parking lot wall. Her face went pale. Moments later, Justin pulled in. He looked at the poster, then at Hope's face, and slammed his hand against the wall. A red smear marked the brick. Right then, a KFCR intern started recording on his phone. Justin shouted, "Who did this? This is private. This is slander." The station manager shrugged. It was an anonymous submission, and technically, it's art. Hope's eyes welled up, but it wasn't anger in her expression. It was fear, deep, hollow fear. She whispered to herself, "Alfred knows." They left in a hurry. But the damage wasn't limited to the radio station wall anymore. The poster's photo spread fast, across Reddit, Facebook local groups, and Twitter. Within hours, it had gone viral. Alfred made sure it stayed that way. He had 4 more copies of the poster mounted at key locations. Behind Sunset Motel, outside Justin's office, at the bus stop near Hope's school, and across from Cedar Falls Library, where Hope worked that evening. When Hope returned home, she saw an envelope placed neatly on the kitchen table. The front read, "For Mrs. Whitaker." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photo, the Sunset Motel parking lot. Her car, Justin's car, side by side. At the bottom, in clean handwriting, "Parking lot of truth, every Thursday." Her breathing grew heavy. She grabbed her phone and called Justin. "He knows, Justin. He knows everything." Justin barked, "Then we file a police report. He's trespassing, harassing us." Hope whispered, "He hasn't even said a word. That's what scares me." The next morning, the Cedar Falls Police Department received a break-in report, filed by Hope Whitaker. She told them someone had entered her home quietly, possibly planted surveillance devices, and left a note inside the refrigerator. Officers arrived and did a full sweep. No damage, no fingerprints, no forced entry. One officer asked, "Are you sure someone broke in?" "Everything looks untouched." Hope said nothing, because everything was untouched. It was her world that wasn't. That evening, Alfred sat in his apartment watching the surveillance feed. Hope was frantically checking every room in her house. Justin followed, yelling, "You said you handled it? You said he was clueless." By the end of the week, Justin had resigned from his job. In the HR office, he simply said, "Personal reasons. I just need some time." Hope, too, received a suspension notice from her school, due to recent public controversy and distraction from duties. Now, even inside her home, Hope began to feel watched. She tapped on walls, removed photo frames, checked vents and lamps. But she found nothing, because Alfred wasn't an amateur anymore. He was a trained shadow. The next day, Alfred dropped a folded newspaper into the feedback box at Cedar Falls Library. On the front page, the poster photo. Below it, written in black ink, "Some books are fiction, some affairs, too real." When Hope arrived at the library, her mailbox was full of newspapers, all with the same image, the same message. In the eyes of the town, she was no longer a librarian. She was a headline. She stopped stepping outside without sunglasses. Her head stayed down. Her hands shook in the morning. Justin said nothing, but his rage was building every day. One night, overwhelmed and trembling, Hope scheduled a therapy appointment. During the very first session, she said, "I feel like I'm being watched. Every corner, every whisper. I feel him." The therapist leaned forward. "Has he contacted you directly?" Hope answered quietly, "That's the thing. He hasn't. And that's what's killing me." That night, Alfred watched the surveillance feed. In the corner of the screen, he saw Hope's face, tear-streaked, shaken, afraid. He softly paused the screen and whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." Whenever a scandal erupts in Cedar Falls, the town doesn't scream right away. First, it whispers. Then, slowly, it starts to shout. Hope Whitaker's life was now buried beneath those whispers. But they weren't just coming from outside. They were rising from within her. It hurts when an old acquaintance on the street looks away. But it shatters something deeper when your own shadow avoids your eyes. Hope was now a prisoner in her own home. But the walls weren't made of bricks. They were built from shame, fear, and Alfred's haunting silence. One day, she logged into her bank account, and her face went ghost white. Checking account, $0.00 savings, frozen credit cards, declined. She called customer service in a panic. The reply was cold. Per your joint ownership agreement, all accounts have been restructured by the primary holder. Mr. Alfred Frell Hope shouted, "He can't do that. He's my husband, not my guardian." The voice replied calmly, "Ma'am, the documentation was legally submitted and verified by the bank and your attorney of record." She froze. "Attorney?" she asked, trembling. "What attorney?" The call disconnected. That attorney was one Alfred had arranged weeks ago under a silent agreement. Hope had unknowingly signed it during a casual dinner party, thinking it was just a routine insurance form. Justin, too, got a shock when he received a FedEx envelope from his ex-wife, Brittany. Inside was a leather folder. It contained full surveillance footage from the Sunset Motel, voice call transcripts of Hope, private data extracted from Justin's insurance company, and a handwritten note. "Your house deserves honesty. He stole more than your marriage. A." That same day, Brittany tossed all of Justin's belongings onto the front lawn. Hope and Justin were now effectively homeless. No landlord in Cedar Falls wanted their names on a lease. Small towns have long memories. Hope looked at Justin and said, "We can stay at your sister's place, right? She'll take us in." Justin looked down. "She won't," he muttered. She read the file. They ended up at a rundown motel. Ironically, the same Sunset Motel where their affair had begun. But this wasn't room 17 anymore. This was room 9, damp, dark, windowless. The ceiling leaked, the curtains were missing, the bed creaked. Hope turned to Justin and asked quietly, "Do you think he'll stop?" Justin said nothing, because by now he understood. Alfred wasn't an ex-husband. He was a methodical, silent destroyer. The next week, Alfred sent an anonymous tip to the IRS, reporting Hope and Justin for insurance fraud and undeclared motel transactions. Then he mailed a flash drive to the ethics committee at Justin's company, containing evidence of Justin using his position to funnel benefits to Hope. Justin received a formal letter of blacklisting. "You are no longer eligible for employment in any licensed financial institution in the state of Iowa." Hope was no longer just alone. She had become a burden, even to Justin. That night, Justin opened a bottle of whiskey and muttered, "You said he was weak. Just a goddamn mailman. You said he'd fold." Hope replied softly, I never really knew him. They didn't argue that night, but the next morning, Justin was gone. Hope found a note on a torn piece of notebook paper. "You were never worth it. Neither was he. I'm out." Hope had finally collapsed, stripped of money, stripped of love, stripped of dignity. She pulled out an old phone and dialed Alfred's number. The call dropped instantly. Then a text appeared on her screen. Automated, cold, and final. "This number no longer accepts contact from Hope Whitaker. Any attempt will result in legal action. Frell and Morgan LLP." Hope collapsed to her knees. A week later, she tried to stay at the Cedar Falls Women's Shelter. But on the intake form, one question stopped her cold. "Have you ever been involved in any public defamation cases?" She checked. No. But when the background check was completed, the volunteer coordinator smiled politely and said, "I'm sorry. We don't have space at the moment." She emailed the school district asking for reinstatement. No reply. She continued therapy. Every session now began with the same quiet question. "Do you still feel like someone's following you?" But Hope's answer had changed. "No. I feel like no one sees me at all anymore." She had become a shadow of her own making. Meanwhile, Alfred had opened a new bank account under his new identity, Nick Buford. He had taken out a fresh insurance policy. Not for himself, but for Max, a small golden retriever he'd adopted from a local shelter. Max often sat quietly in his lap, while Alfred watched old surveillance clips whispering to the screen, "Not yet done, Hope. Not yet." Alfred Frell was no longer a postal worker. He was a writer now, a ghost storyteller, a living reminder that sometimes the most devastating destruction doesn't come from violence, but silence. He hadn't destroyed Hope and Justin. He'd simply left them alone, in the ruins of their own lies. Alfred no longer lived in Cedar Falls. Under the name Nick Buford, he rented a modest two-story house in a quiet lakefront town outside Chicago. Every morning, he walked the streets with Max. He spent afternoons at the local library, scribbling in notebooks. Every week, he visited a different coffee shop, always doing the same thing: writing. The book's title was "The Postman Always Knows Twice." It wasn't a straight revenge thriller. It was a confession, told in fragments, memories, and moments when a man doesn't just break. He reshapes himself into something sharper. Hope and Justin's names never appeared in it. Instead, it was Nina and Jacob. The Sunset Motel became the Crimson Lodge. Cedar Falls was renamed Ashview. Everything had been changed, except the pain, except the reckoning. Alfred never sent the manuscript to a big publisher. He self-published, and in just 1 week, it sold over 14,000 copies on Amazon. Readers called it emotional revenge literature. On Goodreads, it held a 4.9-star rating. Top reviews read, "This isn't a story, this is a storm. I feel like I know the author, or maybe I am the author." Finally, someone wrote what silence sounds like. NBC Chicago sent an exclusive interview request. Alfred didn't go. Instead, he recorded a voice-only podcast episode. He spoke just one line. "If you hurt someone quietly, you deserve to be destroyed quietly." The interview went viral. Slowly, his book caught national attention. Anonymous author of "The Postman Always Knows Twice Spotted Walking Dog in Lakeside Town" read one headline. Meanwhile, Hope was still living just outside Cedar Falls in a rundown senior motel. Every day, she received mocking mail, all addressed in her name. One afternoon, a small brown envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a book. Her book. Fictional names, changed locations. But every detail was unmistakably hers. Hope's hands trembled as she began to read. Halfway through, she rushed to the bathroom and vomited. She contacted a lawyer immediately, filed a civil lawsuit. "This book violates my privacy," she said. But after reading it, the attorney simply replied, "Names changed. Locations changed. It's technically fiction. You don't have a case." Hope was devastated, but she didn't give up. She recorded a YouTube video, bare-faced, no makeup, looking straight into the camera. "Hi, I'm the real Nina from the book, and I want to tell my side of the story." The video went viral, but not in the way she hoped. The comments said, "Too late, Nina. He didn't expose you. You exposed yourself. If the shoe fits." Alfred watched the video. Max rested in his lap. He muted the TV and turned to the surveillance screen. Yes, surveillance. He was still watching Hope and Justin. How? Because back when he entered the Sunset Motel, he didn't just plant devices in their house. He also installed a discreet microcamera inside the motel's air vent. Justin's jacket still carried a tiny tracking chip, which synced every 2 days through open Wi-Fi, uploading encrypted data. Alfred's computer wasn't just a war room anymore. It had become a documentary studio. Every clip, every argument, every tear, every lie, cataloged, archived. But Alfred never used it for blackmail. He just watched. He observed. Justin had returned to Hope, but he wasn't the same man. Now he was angry, unemployed, and spiraling into depression. Hope, too, had unraveled. She cried through most therapy sessions. One day she asked the therapist, "Do you think I deserved this?" The therapist didn't answer. Then came the night it boiled over. A vicious argument. A window shattered. Hope shoved Justin. He crashed into the same corner of the room where Alfred had placed the microcamera. Alfred watched the scene unfold. He paused the footage, and in a whisper he said, "They're undoing each other. I don't even have to lift a finger anymore." He was no longer just a man seeking revenge. He had become a chronicler. The outline for his next book was already on his desk. Title: The Window Never Closed. Subtitle: A Story of Watching the Wounds Heal Wrong. Alfred wasn't a camera operator anymore. He was a judge, not in a courtroom, but in silence, through observation. He delivered his form of justice. Hope began glancing at the window each night. Sometimes she whispered softly, "Alfred, are you there?" But no answer ever came. Just silence. And that silence was the loudest thing in her world. Far from Cedar Falls, in a quiet courthouse outside Chicago, 2 people sat in silence. Once husband and wife, now plaintiff and defendant. Hope Whitaker had filed for divorce. A final attempt, maybe for closure, maybe just to make him speak again. But this was a courtroom. And here, emotion meant nothing. Only evidence spoke. Her attorney, Mitchell Evans, was a senior civil litigator. He stood confidently before the judge and said, "Your Honor, we will prove emotional cruelty, financial abandonment, and an egregious violation of privacy." Alfred entered the courtroom alone, wearing a plain gray suit, his face unreadable. In his hand, a thick brown leather folder, its weight perfectly matching the calm gravity in his expression. Hope's attorney began, "Your Honor, my client suffered months of psychological abuse. Her bank accounts were frozen. She was forced into homelessness. And now, she lives with the trauma of being portrayed in a widely circulated book. A story that mirrors her life, written with clear, malicious intent." Hope sat with her head down, as if trying to hide from both guilt and humiliation. When it was Alfred's turn, his lawyer said nothing. Instead, Alfred stood up and spoke directly. "Your Honor, I'll speak for myself." The courtroom fell silent. He pulled out the first page from his folder. A marriage certificate. "Ma'am and I were married for 11 years. I delivered mail by day, made dinner by night. We lived simply." Then he held up a second document. A receipt from Sunset Motel. This was her destination every Thursday, not a book club. Motel Room 17. Here's the timestamp. Signed, J. Miller. Hope's face turned pale. Then Alfred presented surveillance screenshots, blurred, but clearly identifiable. This footage was not obtained illegally. I had access to the property through our prior co-ownership. Hope's attorney rose sharply. Objection. Invasion of privacy. The judge responded, "Continue, Mr. Frell, but stay within legal boundaries." Alfred remained composed. "I didn't write a book to shame her. I wrote it to survive her. The names were changed, the places were fictionalized, but the pain was real." The judge leaned forward now, listening closely. Alfred displayed financial records. Every account transfer, every transaction was signed in advance. Here is the notarized document, signed during a couple's dinner. She thought it was an insurance form. Hope's attorney interjected again. "That's manipulation." Alfred replied calmly, "No, Your Honor, that's preparation." Then he handed the judge a folder. Label, Chronology of Silence, 14 Months of Betrayal. Inside were photographs, voice call transcripts, private chats between Justin and Hope, hotel records, and recordings of Hope in therapy saying, "He doesn't deserve love. He's too small for this world." Alfred's closing statement was simple. "I never hit her, never screamed, never exposed her to the world. I just walked away." With the truth, a heavy silence followed. Hope's attorney made one last attempt. "Your Honor, even if my client exercised poor judgment, she is still entitled to fair alimony." For the first time during the entire hearing, Alfred turned and looked directly at Hope. "She's already been paid, in regret, in shame, and in the collapse of every lie she built." The judge looked over the documents, the timeline, the testimony, and finally delivered the ruling. Given the extensive evidence of infidelity, the absence of emotional or physical abuse by the defendant, and the legal legitimacy of financial actions, this court rules in favor of Mr. Frell. No alimony, no settlement, full divorce granted, case closed. Hope let out a long breath, but no tears came. There was nothing left in her to cry out. As they exited the courthouse, a reporter approached Hope. "Do you think justice was served?" She looked ahead and replied softly, "Justice? He never even raised his voice. That's what hurts the most." That evening, Hope mailed a letter to Alfred's new address, handwritten, with no return label. It read, "I don't know if you'll read this or burn it like the bridges between us. I'm sorry, not for being caught, but for never seeing you when you were right there. I was cruel, and you were just quiet. I miss your silence." It was kinder than my words. Hope. The following week, a courier arrived addressed to Hope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Do not contact again. Frell & Morgan, LLP." Now every time Hope heard a sound, she looked toward the door, and in every silence, she thought she heard breathing, as if someone was still watching. She knew Alfred would never reply, because his silence had become his final verdict. Most people believe a story ends when revenge is complete. But Alfred Frell's story began exactly where others' stories end. To him, Cedar Falls was like an old letter, read, burned, and scattered into the wind. He now lived in a lakeside town north of Chicago called Willowbrook. No one there called him Alfred Frell. Everyone knew him as Nick Buford, a freelance editor and part-time dog trainer, and always by his side, Max, the golden retriever who had become his quiet companion in this new life. Every morning, Alfred walked along the frozen lake with Max. The air carried a stillness that didn't remind him of the past. People in Willowbrook liked him, but didn't ask questions. That's all Alfred wanted. A place that smiled, but never looked back. He never released a second edition of his book. He told his publisher, "Let the storm settle." But he never stopped writing. His new novel was about redemption and second chances. There was no betrayal, no revenge, just a man who had made peace with his past and was now learning how to hold on to the present. On the first page of his notebook at the local library, he had written, "The monsters I fought weren't out in the world. They wore perfume, they read books, and sometimes they smiled before they cut." Hope was now trying to rebuild her life in a small shared apartment outside Detroit. She had taken a part-time job at an NGO, helping domestic abuse survivors with paperwork. It wasn't irony. It was karma. She filled out other people's files, while still feeling the empty spaces in her own. Justin was gone. Last seen checked into a rehab facility, then disappeared. Hope began attending church on Sundays, not for confession, just to sit quietly. Her face no longer hid behind makeup. She looked tired, but calm. She knew her story no longer belonged to the world. It had become a private punishment. She once sent Alfred one last email, formally worded, "I've started working again. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know. I've stopped running." There was no reply. Alfred didn't respond anymore. He simply recorded, within himself, emotions, people, wounds. He built Max a fenced-in courtyard, adopted 2 more dogs from the shelter, Bailey and Clover. Now, every evening, he walked all 3. Neighbors would say, "Nick's pack is the gentlest in town." Eventually, Alfred joined a volunteer program, mentoring runaway teens. He didn't lecture. He didn't advise. He just listened. One day, a 17-year-old girl asked him, "How do you forgive someone who ruined you?" Alfred smiled and said, "You don't. You outlive them." The town library invited him for a small reading. Alfred read one line from his new novel. "Some storms come to destroy you. Others come to wash you clean." The room was silent. Then, gentle applause. And for the first time, Alfred looked up and met the eyes of the people around him. He wasn't running anymore. Hope saw that photo online. Alfred in a black sweater, Max in his lap, a calm on his face she'd never known. She stared at the screen, like it was the final page of a story. But the truth was, Alfred's story hadn't ended. He was no longer a man who stopped at revenge. He was writing a new chapter now, one of pain, but also grace, of solitude, but also self-respect. One evening, Alfred sat by the lake with Max. The sun was setting. He closed his notebook and looked at Max. "Ready to go home, boy?" Max wagged his tail. Alfred stood, his steps no longer heavy. He wasn't running from anything now. He was simply walking forward. A chill breeze touched Willowbrook's lake the last time Hope ever saw Alfred. It was at a farmer's market, people buying organic apples and pumpkins. She stood at a distance, in a worn gray coat and cheap sneakers, holding a warm coffee. Her face wasn't hidden, but her eyes stayed low. She recognized him instantly. Alfred, now Nick, with Max and 2 other rescue dogs. He was standing at a stall, gently explaining the difference between kale and spinach to a child. His eyes, they had the same quiet simplicity. But no questions now, no anger, just peace. Hope waited, hoping he'd look at her. Just once. Maybe he'd nod. Maybe he'd say, "I see you've changed." Or maybe, "I forgive you." But Alfred never looked her way. Maybe he saw her, but he didn't stop. He took Max's leash, picked up his bag, and turned to walk away. Hope took one step forward, then stopped. She knew. This was the last chance. She whispered, "Alfred," but her voice disappeared into the wind. Alfred was gone. Max looked back, as if sensing a familiar ghost, and then moved on. Hope stood across the street at the edge of a memory. She whispered to herself, maybe he did see me. Maybe that's why he didn't stop. Weeks later, she saw a new book cover. The Window Never Closed, subheading, When Silence Becomes the Only Truth. She didn't order it. She didn't read reviews. She knew. That book wasn't meant for her. Years later, Willowbrook's local archive gave Alfred Frell's works their own permanent section. The Mailman Memoirs. A small plaque on the wall read, He never shouted. He never blamed. But when he walked away, he took everything false with him. Hope would sometimes pass the archive, but she never went inside. Still, every time she walked by, her pace slowed, as if even her footsteps knew. She no longer belonged to that story. Inside, Alfred's words lived on, in books, podcasts, and in the mouths of people who never knew him as a postman, only as a storyteller. And outside, hope, a shadow, once a photograph, now just a fading reflection. On the final snowfall of that year, Hope mailed a card. No address, just Willowbrook Library. Inside, it said, You were never invisible. I was just blind. The card never came back. But one day, Hope saw it, tucked between the pages of The Postman Always Knows Twice on the donation shelf. She smiled and walked away. She didn't apologize. She simply understood. For Alfred, it wasn't a victory. It was closure. He wasn't a postman anymore, or a writer. He was just a man who knew. Sometimes silence is the loudest voice of all, and everything he left behind in that silence had finally stayed behind. Story ends.